I would like to arouse in you a deeper interest in the subject of spiritual healing. I would like you, as a result of this work, not only to have a deeper interest in the subject from the standpoint of your own well-being, those immediately around you, but from the broader aspect of the world. As you know, there is no such thing as the world benefiting to any great degree from any mass movement. All good comes from individuals. Nothing worthwhile has ever been invented by a board of directors, and no discovery worthwhile has ever been made except through individual activity. No great piece of art, literature, or music has ever been brought forth except by an individual. And so it is that the great teachings that have come to earth through individuals. A Lao Tzu has contributed his great part to this world, a Buddha, a Jesus, a John, Paul, Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Isaiah, Mrs. Eddy, Mrs. Fillmore. Always it is an individual who contributes to that which ultimately saves the world. You can have an army go out and fight Great Britain and make the United States a free country, but they wouldn't stay free very long if there hadn't been an individual to come along with the idea of a Constitution of the United States or a Bill of Rights, or to insert in these the right of religious freedom and worship and so forth and so on. Always it is an individual. And so it is that this ultimate salvation of the world through spiritual healing is going to come through an individual you and an individual me and an individual he and an individual she here and there, showing forth by the fruitage in our individual lives something that causes a friend or a relative to go and seek and do likewise, and then ultimately to have the neighbor down the street do likewise. So it has been that because of the success of spiritual healing in the Christian Science movement, there grew a unity movement and there grew a New Thought movement, and today the spiritual healing movement is spreading to the other churches. It all had to begin with an individual or a group of individuals, and so it's going to be from here on in. Now, if I can prove in my personal life and in the experience of my immediate students that we have found a principle of healing, a spiritual principle, it is natural that others are going to become interested in it and to want to go and do likewise. And in that way, we contribute to this spread that has been going on this past 75 years and is now on the increase. Each of us is a thread in this chain, in this skein, in this rope, or a link in the chain. Each one of us is a beam in the whole light. None of us can ever be more than that. It takes the individual here and there, each contributing his part, to make up the whole. And so it is that the world benefits every time that you bring through a healing. Whether for yourself or another, the world is that much closer to receiving the full spiritual light by every individual healing that takes place. Now, the healing work in and of itself is not difficult. As a matter of fact, it becomes so simple that there is a temptation to do nothing but sit in an office and heal and eventually lead a very monotonous life. because ultimately there is no excitement to healing. There is no particular thrill to it. It is such a simple matter when it is carefully, when the principles are carefully followed. But the difficulty that comes in, well, let me go back a minute and illustrate. If all of our friends would agree not to read any books on metaphysics, it would be a simple matter to heal them, because they would completely relax their own efforts and trust entirely to the understanding that we have, and very quickly that understanding would give them a measure of freedom. They wouldn't hold it long, in most cases, because, as the Master said, go and sin no more lest the worst thing come upon you. Ordinarily, the moment a person is freed of their pains and diseases, they will run back to the same form of life and the same way of thinking that brought them to this in the first place. And so you haven't done too much for a person when you merely heal them. But what happens is that most people, when they experience healing, want to know how it's done. And that is when the difficult part of this work comes along, the teaching, the enlightening. Because behind every individual lies their natural inhibitions, prejudices, biases, bigotries, and they're difficult to break through. The first part of your work will be easy and pleasant. That is the healing part. And the next step will be difficult and unpleasant. And that is the teaching part. Because there is a natural resistance to truth that always has existed and appears to be just as vigorous as it was in the Master's day. The things of God are foolishness with man, and man insists on being man and keeping his foolishness. The natural man receiveth not the things of God, and the natural man is the man that is always seeking to get, to acquire, to have, and to hold. And of course, that makes him very unsusceptible to spiritual influence. And so while everybody would like to be relieved of their pains, the moment they discover how it happened, and you expect them to go and give up some of those very human tendencies, that is when your troubles as a teacher begin. But we will take only first things first and see if we can't bring out a higher sense of healing, a greater measure of healing in your experience and in the experience of those in your world. And so let me bring first back to your conscious remembrance that the starting point of spiritual healing is the giving up of criticism, judgment, condemnation in your patients, in your students, in your friends, in your relatives. Stop fastening error onto them. Stop looking for it in them, and stop condemning them for it, even if it's there. And you can only do that by realizing that they are not responsible for it. They are merely the victims of this world belief in good and evil. Now, as you begin that process of not searching your patients' or students' or family's thoughts for their hidden errors, but rather realize that regardless of the nature of the error that is disturbing them, it is not their fault that they are victims of a universal belief. We call it a hypnotism. Then, with that brief sense of freedom which you bring to yourself and to them, by releasing yourself and them from condemnation, start on the positive aspect. Start with the word God. Try to realize what you have learned in your metaphysical studies and your spiritual studies. Try to realize what God is. Not so much what God is as what the nature of God is. No one can really know God humanly, but we can know the nature of God. In this book, The Art of Meditation, you will have specific instruction in how that is done. First of all, by beholding the nature of the activity of the stars, the sun, the moon, the tides, and noting the regularity of these movements, the orderliness, the law that's involved, the exactness of it all, and thereby perceiving that intelligence must be the very nature of God being. We're looking out at what we call nature and observing that it is apples that grow on apple trees and peaches on peach trees and cherries on cherry trees, that roses grow on rose bushes, orchids on orchid plants. And they're noting, too, how intelligence governs that there are no exceptions to that rule. There's no chance or accident about it. There is a definite law that like begets like. If you have white, you get white. If you combine white and black, you get white and black, and so forth and so on. There is intelligence behind every operation of nature. There is intelligence behind mathematics. There is intelligence behind music. There is intelligence behind art. Intelligence is the very nature of God. And then you'll find another thing, that the nature of God is love. You will see how by this very law God's love is made manifest. That love embraces this creation, fish in the sea and birds in the air, everything provided where it should be, when it should be. That is the normal, natural condition of being on earth. All of this is evidence that love is of the nature of God, intelligence and love. Now you see, into that universe of God, there can be no inharmony and no discord. Into that perfect universe of God's creativeness and God's maintaining and sustaining nature, where intelligence and love are the major factors, no discord, no inharmony ever appears, and that world is called Eden. That world is called the Garden of Eden. That world is called divine harmony, or it has another name, spiritual consciousness. Into spiritual consciousness, no error ever intrudes. No form of error ever intrudes into spiritual consciousness. Now here you have the basic premise of God's being and God's function in our experience. There remains only one question to be answered. How then into this Garden of Eden does a serpent come? How into this spiritual consciousness does error eventually intrude and bring about the conditions that we know as sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, wars, depressions, accidents? For this you will only learn if you practice the principle of neither good nor evil. Practice this principle until you yourself see that the only reason these discords have come in to make up our universe is that back in this so-called Garden of Eden was accepted the belief of good and evil. Now, you and I are entertaining in some measure the belief of good and evil. We all know those things that we call good, those things we call evil, those conditions we call good, those conditions we call evil, those persons we call good, those we call evil, and from my experience I can say to you that that's what you're going to perpetuate as long as you insist on having this belief of good and evil making up your life. And I say to you further from experience that in proportion as you can overcome in yourself the belief in two powers, good and evil, in that proportion will the discords and inharmonies be ruled out of your experience and out of the experience of all who come within range of your consciousness. You can begin to apply this in a very simple way by going into your home where you may have birds or pets or children, and begin right there with, no longer will I think of you as good, no longer will I think of you as evil, but I will look upon you as God's creation, created in his own image and likeness, and having the qualities of God. All that the Father hath is thine, and I will henceforth see you only in that way. When you go into your shops to market, watch the difference when you learn to look on the clerks in there as if they were neither good nor evil, and refuse to bestow any praise or condemnation on them, calling them neither good nor evil, but children of God, servants of the Most High. Watch what happens in your immediate family as you begin to unlearn what you know now about your husband or your wife or your child or your parent, and begin to go back to their original selfhood, which was created in the image and likeness of God, and realize that in and of themselves they have no qualities of good or evil, that all they are is that which God constituted in them and of them and through them. You will quickly perceive that these errors of conduct and of thought will lessen as you lift from them both praise and condemnation. No man is good, although he may be the instrument through which God's good flows. And no man is evil, although he may be the outlet through which the world's sense of evil may flow. Paul revealed that to us when he said that the good I would I do not, the evil that I would not, that I do. I find in me no sin, but a sense of sin still bothers me. In other words, I'm not really a sinner, and I have no desire to sin nor any pleasure in it, yet I find myself sometimes being the instrument through which sin takes over. So says Paul, and so says all of us, I'm sure, that the evil that we would not, we sometimes still do, even though we know better. And it is not because we are sinners, because left to ourselves we would never even think a wrong thought, but that this universal sense of sin is so great that it sometimes overpowers us. But the overcoming begins when we realize that it isn't I who am the sinner, but a sense of sin that would disturb me or take over in me. In the same way, it is not I who am good, but I who am an instrument through which God's good will flow in proportion as I will recognize God to be the source of good instead of myself. Now, begin in very small ways to withdraw from those pets and persons about you the condemnation in which you've held them and the praise in which you've held them, and begin to look through to the fact that God alone constitutes their being, and it is God's quality which expresses itself in them and through them. And as you behold in small ways, small beginnings, a change taking place in you and those around you, you will know that you have found the principle. And from then on, it will be with you as it is with me. merely the continuous living of it, so that as each day goes on, a greater degree of it becomes apparent in us. I can assure you of this, that our demonstration of this is a proportionate one. At no time and no place do we show forth the fullness of the Godhead bodily. It is only that every day that we can adhere consciously to these principles, every day will this improvement show forth in our experience and in the experience of those who come to us. And not only that we will show forth more spirituality, but we will bring out more spirituality made manifest as health, supply, harmony, peace, and joy in those about us. Now, I would like to recommend that those of you who have copies of this Art of Meditation, between now and this afternoon, read the chapter, Ye Are the Temple. Take that chapter for this afternoon, and then when we come in here, what is it, 3 o'clock? At 3 o'clock, you see, I'm assuming that you're going to find between now and 3 o'clock at least a free half or 3/4 of an hour or maybe a whole hour to be alone, so as to make this day really worthwhile in our experience. Try to steal an hour away from your families. Read this chapter, Ye Are the Temple, and have a pad and pencil or pen with you. And if some question comes to your mind, write it down and bring it here and put it on this table this afternoon. And let us see if we can't straighten out some of the things that have held us back from doing greater works in spiritual healing and spiritual living, and have more to show forth when the next time does come around, that we can all be here together in Chicago or some other city. And so let us stop for now until 3 o'clock. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And indeed we are continuing where we left off this morning, because we started this morning on this subject of spiritual healing and the how and the why and the wherefore. And I would like to feel that when I leave Chicago this trip, that you will have had a complete exposition of that subject of spiritual healing, as complete as it can be given in one day. And that can be complete if you have the background to serve as a foundation for it. I couldn't give a complete lesson on spiritual healing in one day to a beginner. As a matter of fact, I don't believe I could even do it in 1 year. I wouldn't want to try to do it in less than a year, but with the background that most of you have in the study of the Infinite Way writings and the Infinite Way recordings, it should be a simple matter for you to receive the answers to whatever questions are still in your mind on that subject, and also to be able to receive the help that will enable you to carry the work forward in even greater measure. Now, I will go back for a few minutes to this morning and rehearse very briefly these few points. Number one, that you start your spiritual healing ministry by releasing yourself or your patient or student from condemnation. by withdrawing any judgment, criticism, condemnation of their character, life, habits, thoughts. Release them from not only the condemnation of the world, but their own condemnation of themselves and any condemnation that you may entertain, by realizing that regardless of what form of error they may be thinking or feeling, that it is not personal to them, but that it is rather a part of this universal mesmerism or belief that has resulted in a human world, so that we are not the cause of our own sins or diseases. We are victims of a universal belief which at the moment we do not know how to free ourselves of. As if I were to say to you, in your coming to me, I find no fault in you. I find no fault in you. Who hath sinned? You or your parents? Neither. Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more, lest the worst thing come upon you. Try not to go back to your past way of thinking and believing, because it can only result in the same type of existence. But neither do I condemn thee. Who made me a judge over you? Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents. I have been told that I must forgive 70 times 7, so I forgive you. If you come back tomorrow and tell me that you sinned again, I'll say, neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. And if you come back the next day and say, I've sinned again, I'll say, neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. My function as practitioner is never to hold an individual in bondage to any of their sins of omission or commission, even if they commit them 70 times 7. Still, I must release them 70 times 7 and not hold them in judgment. So you can imagine that in starting out with yourself or another, regardless of how much you know of your own sins or the others, start by releasing yourself and them from any sense of condemnation or punishment. Nobody deserves punishment for their sins. We receive punishment for our sins, not because we deserve them, but because we inflict them on ourselves. What we deserve is forgiveness and understanding of why we sinned. And when we are given forgiveness, more especially if we're given it over and over again, and if we're given an understanding of the fact that we're not sinning in order to be bad, we're not sinning deliberately, but because we find the sense of sin within ourselves that we cannot at the moment handle, we are helped to get past the stage of sinning. So there must be understanding, there must be compassion, there must be love. And that means whether the person is sinning or whether they're sick. Now, if you hold yourself without condemnation, and if you hold those about you without condemnation, always in the attitude of, neither do I condemn thee, I understand, Go and sin no more, because you're bringing more trouble on yourself. But I don't condemn you for it. You're condemning yourself. In that degree, I lift from you the burden of your own errors. And that sets you free to receive God's grace. Now, the number one point in spiritual healing is never to look for error in yourself or your patient, never to criticize, judge, or condemn for the errors that temporarily exist there, always to take the attitude of neither do I judge nor condemn thee, and continuously and continually set each other free of that condemnation. Now, the second point is to realize the affirmative side of the picture. That is, that God actually is the cause and creator of this universe and all that is therein, and therefore everything is God-created, God-governed, God-maintained, and God-sustained. When you realize that, you will realize that the so-called errors of this world, the sins and the diseases, lacks and limitations, do not exist as actual conditions or states of being, but exist more as illusory pictures or concepts in our mind. That makes them just as real as if they were real when we are suffering from them, but it also makes it possible for us to be healed of them. We cannot be healed spiritually while we accept a sin, a disease, a lack as an actual condition that has to be met. It is only possible to heal spiritually when you know the unreal nature of that which is causing the trouble in our experience. Now, you who have studied metaphysics have studied for many years about the illusory nature of sin and disease. You have been taught to call it an illusion. You have been taught to call it mortal mind or nothingness. But with most students, that illusion or that mortal mind or nothingness still remains as something to be healed or removed. That is why we hear over the phone so often and receive in our mail so often, I know this is only illusion, but will you help me get rid of it? But you see, that's nonsense. The minute you know it's an illusion, you know it's nothingness, you have nothing left to get rid of. It was only in the human belief that sin and disease are real that you have something to get rid of. Nobody has anything to get rid of after they know that what's been troubling them is an illusion. If somebody saw a ghost over in the corner and said, get rid of it, you can understand that. They are seeing it as an it in the corner. But after they awaken to the fact that it was an illusion, what would you think of them if they still said, get rid of it? No. Once you perceive that which the Master called this world is really an illusion, you'll know why he could overcome this world. He could overcome it through the understanding that it was an illusion. And that was the overcoming, and that's all the overcoming there ever can be, is knowing that a thing isn't a thing, a condition isn't a condition, a person isn't a person. You're dealing with an illusion, and that really should dissolve it. It doesn't always. That's why we have gone forward from the older metaphysics into the infinite way, because knowing that it was an illusion didn't always end the discord. It was in my personal experience that I found that just knowing that a condition is an illusion doesn't always dissolve it. And I had to go the next step to find what produced these illusions. What is it that produces sin, disease, death, wars, lack, limitation in a world that is God created, God maintained, and God sustained, in which everything really is perfection? What then causes this illusion or Adam dream or material state of consciousness that produces all our ills? Well, those of you who were here a couple of years ago when we had that little private class, or those who have heard those tapes, no, it wasn't here, it was Portland. It was after we left here and continued the work in Portland. And that Portland private class opened with a reading from a current national magazine, in which the editor asked a Roman Catholic priest, a Protestant minister, and a Hebrew rabbi why so many people are going back to church and what good is it going to do them if God has seen fit to do nothing about the evils that exist. And this editor brought out the fact that so many children were born in negative conditions of health, mind, and body, and that children were suffering from diseases for which they were not responsible, that very fine men and women in the world were going through horrible ordeals. And how do you account for this? Why is this? Why are these people going back to church, and what good is it going to do them after they go there? And these three men who were nationally chosen all gave the same answer. We don't know why God permits these things. We think that God permits them to chastise His children. That's not a bad idea. Just give them a lot of cancer, some consumption. That'll make them good. Let them be born blind, deaf, dumb, paralyzed. That'll be good for them. Can't you imagine God saying or believing anything like that? But these people, untrained in spiritual research, had no better answer than that. We don't know why God permits it, but we think He has a good reason. We know the answer. Many of you know the answer, because you've had experience in finding out that through your metaphysical and spiritual understanding, that these very conditions that they believe God is responsible for, you can stop that fast. Many of you have had these things stopped in your own bodies and minds. Many of you have witnessed mental and physical healings. Some of you have seen them by the hundreds. And you know right well that God isn't responsible for them, or you couldn't stop them through your understanding. You know right well that the Christian Science Church and the Unity Church and whoever else heals couldn't have gone on for 75 years if they weren't able to stop those very things that these people say they can't understand why God permits. God doesn't permit them. Our ignorance permits them to continue. Once we understand God's law, they stop. They don't intrude into our experience. God never permitted them, and God doesn't permit them to continue, and God has no awareness of them, and they have no existence the very moment ye know the truth. The truth will make you free. Why, did you ever hear of Jesus saying God was responsible for somebody's ills? Did you ever hear that Jesus say that God was teaching you a lesson or wanted to chastise you? Jesus stopped it like this because of his tremendous understanding of God's laws and God's spiritual healing laws, and in proportion as we learn as much about or attain the consciousness of the nothingness of these things, will we do those same works that Jesus did. In a measure, we're doing them. We can't claim the same degree of instantaneity and of completeness that he was able to manifest, but probably because he was dedicated solely to that end. We will someday attain that because it's possible. God is no respecter of persons, and what's possible for one is possible to all in proportion to our devotion that will enable us to attain that same mind that was in Christ Jesus. Because Peter and John proved that the same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead, through them raised up this crippled man at the temple gate beautiful. They didn't say it was Jesus that did it, and they didn't say that it was they that did it. They said the same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead, and it will quicken your mortal bodies. Now, one of the quickest and most powerful ways of stopping these sins and diseases that have baffled the theological world is to understand, first of all, that God has nothing to do with them and knows nothing about them, and that they actually have no existence as real conditions. Secondly, to discover with me where they came from. Because when you know where they came from, you'll know how to stop them. Every error that has ever existed on the face of the earth comes from our acceptance of the belief of two powers, good and evil. That's where every error comes from, and that will stop these errors dead in their tracks the very moment that you can bring yourself to the realization there is no good and there is no evil. There is only God in expression, God in manifestation, God in formation. Evil has no existence in effect. Good has no existence in effect. There is no good and there is no evil anywhere in the world of effect. Now, I would like to make that clear for you. So we'll go on from where we were this morning to this next subject. Let me explain to you so that you can see clearly that what I'm saying to you is truth, so that you won't merely have to take my word for it, that you will have within yourself the conviction of the rightness of what I'm saying. There is neither good nor evil in any form or effect. And we will start with an illustration that I have been using for many years, that of this hand. And I will say to you that this is not a good hand and this is not a bad hand, that this is merely a hand. If this hand gives, it is really not giving at all. It is I who am giving, and this hand is but the instrument for my giving. If I withhold, this is not a withholding hand and a stingy hand and a bad hand. This is merely a hand. I happen to be the one who am withholding or am stingy or miserly, and the hand is but an instrument used. If my hand pets, be assured of this, it doesn't. My hand has no such capacity. It is I who pet, and the hand is but the medium or instrument which I use. And if my hand punches, don't punish it, because my hand can't help it. It isn't really punching at all. It's I who am using this hand incorrectly. If this hand steals, there's no use cutting it off and sending it to prison for life. Better send me, because the hand isn't a thief. I am. Do you follow that? That this hand can't be good and it can't be bad. It can only be an instrument through which I function. Now, if you will follow this example in your body from head to foot, you will find that God has given you an instrument through which to live, and that instrument has no capacity to be sick or to be well. It has no capacity to be pure or to sin. It's that little word I that does all of the dirty work. Never forget that. The body in and of itself is dead. The body is as dead as that hand. And that hand can't be anything except what I instruct it to be. And so it goes with this entire body. Your body was never given dominion over you. And your heart was never given dominion over your life. And your liver and your lungs and your digestion and your elimination, they were never given dominion over you. But you were given dominion over them. You merely, through ignorance, turned over your dominion to some pills and powders. Some of you even turned it over to the horoscopes. The stars over which you were given dominion, you have given dominion over you. Some. This earth and all that is therein, over which you were given dominion, you have given dominion over you. It isn't your fault any more than it's my fault. Every one of us were born into that kind of a world in which we were taught from the very beginning that, well, in my day, it was you must eat spinach. I don't know what they give the youngsters now in place of spinach, but I'm sure it's something that doesn't taste good. Through our acceptance of this belief in good and evil, we have accepted some things as good and some as evil, and we have turned over, all unconsciously, our jurisdiction, our dominion to them. Instead of saying, look, hand, you just are not going to punch, and I'm going to see to it. And you're not going to steal. I'm going to see to that. You're just not going to go out there wandering off by yourself and doing what you'd like to do. I'm taking a firm hold of you. And I'm holding you right in my mind, too, or you're not going to get away from me. And I'll determine what you'll do, where you'll be, and why. One of these days you will find that you can do that with your entire body. You can take this entire body into your thought and say to it, I was given jurisdiction over you. I was given dominion over you. I and my Father are one, and all that my Father hath is mine. And that means jurisdiction over my world, over my body, over my finances, over my everything. Now, there you come to what would seem to be, and what is in a human picture, a choice. I can be good and I can be evil. I can be sick and I can be well, as long as we are thinking in the human sense of I. And so we take this next step. After we have seen that this hand is neither good nor bad, And after we've discovered that my judgment may not be too good as to how to govern the hand, we can say this: since you are the temple of the living God, I will let the I, which is God, govern you. And then, you see, you'll be releasing your entire body into God government. Not the human I, not the personal sense of I, but the I which in truth I am, the offspring of God. I can turn this body and business and home and practice, everything over to that infinite, indivisible I, and let it govern. And then I will find that the government of my body, of my mind, and of my affairs is always in perfect order. That is when I withdraw the personal sense of I and let this I which created the world in the beginning, this I which says, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee, this I which says, as I was with Abraham, so I will be with you. Before Abraham was, I am with you. This I that says, I am the bread of life, I am the water, I am the wine, I am the resurrection, I am life eternal. Once you learn to turn everything over to that I which in truth I am, then you find that this spiritual impulse that governs in the spiritual universe is now governing in your daily affairs, because you have made your daily affairs a part of the spiritual universe. Here, you must see this: that there is no power for good or for evil in any form. That means any effect, that which Paul calls the creature. He says you worship the creature more than the creator. That means you worship more that which is created more than that which did the creating. And so it is that every time we hate or fear some form of evil, we are worshiping the creature rather than the creator. If we were to withdraw our fear from all forms of error, we would be honoring God. Remember that God is infinite, and therefore, theoretically at least, God's power is infinite. So to believe that any form or effect has power is to dishonor God. It is to say that God isn't all power, a germ is power too. Infection is power. Bad weather is power. Food is power. That's dishonoring God, because you are now putting power in effect in the creature rather than saying that all power is in the Creator. If all power is in the Creator, no power is in the creature. No power, except the power of government by the Creator, of being governed by the creative principle. Now then, this involves a daily practice until our consciousness is lifted to the point where we can look on any form of error and say to it, Pilate, thou couldst have no power over me unless it came from the Father in heaven. Now, Pilate was a pretty wicked power. Pilate was the highest temporal power of his day. Pilate claimed that he had power of life or death. Yet the master could say, thou couldst have no power over me. Well, you know, there are pilots of sickness in our world saying to us that they have power of life and death over us. There are organs and functions of our body saying to us that they have power of life and death over us. Well, just think. The heart can give you life or give you death, it says. But you know what the master would say? Heart, you could have no power over me unless it came from God. For God governs my life and my being and my body. And I do not accept power in a man or power in a thing. And that's why he said, what did hinder you? What did hinder you? What's preventing you? Pick up your bed and walk. Acknowledging no power in the condition that was holding that individual in bondage. He gave no power to sin. He gave no power to disease. He gave no power to the thief on the cross. In everything he released them. Now, all power is in me, capital M-E. That is, all power is in the I of my own being. I, the I of my own being, the divine I, ego, God, that divine I is the creative principle, the maintaining and sustaining principle of my existence. And I must begin by denying that there is any power of good that can act upon me, and deny that there is any power of evil that can act upon me, for I alone am power. I am the life. I am the truth. I am the way. I am the wine. I am the bread. I am the water. I am the resurrection. All power exists within the I of my being, not my personal ego, not some swaggering creature that walks up and down the earth saying, I am God. But the I, which is the God center of our being, within that, individual you and me, within that is the issue of life and death. And when you look unto me, you will be saved. When you look unto the me within you, when you look unto the I of your being and say, that I of my being governs my life, my mind, my soul, my body, my purse, my business, my household, my home, you will find that gradually, in a measure, all power will be taken out of the world of effect, and the power will flow out from within you. You must be just as willing, however, to give up the good powers of this world as the evil powers. You may not receive good powers from outside any more than you want to receive evil powers from outside. You must acknowledge that all power is within me. I and my Father are one, and all that the Father hath is mine. All of the power and the glory and the dominion that is of the Father is of the Son, the divine selfhood, the Christhood of our individual being, and it flows out from me to me. It does not come to me from you or from anybody in the world. It may come through you, but it's coming from the divine I, which is at the center of my being.